If you've been searching for a color film simulation recipe for your Ricoh GR III or GR IIIx, look no further than Reggie's Color Negative. This film simulation recipe started out as an attempt to recreate the look of my popular Fujifilm recipe, Reggie's Portra, but for the Ricoh GR III and the GR IIIx. And after tweaking and testing it over the past year, I feel like it has evolved into its own unique look that rivals Fujifilm. It's not quite the same colors and tones, but it's an amazing alternative. Before I walk you through all the settings for Reggie's Color Negative, I wanted to take a moment to thank today's video sponsor, Squarespace. I've actually been using Squarespace for over 10 years. Their templates and easy-to-use interface make it incredibly simple to create and maintain a professional-looking website without any coding experience necessary. My Squarespace website was an essential part of how I built my photography business. It allows me to showcase my portfolio, share recent work on my blog, and receive inquiries from potential clients through my contact form. If you're one of those photographers relying on your Instagram profile as the sole place to share your work and build your photography business, I would really consider making a website on Squarespace. You can visit squarespace.com/Reggie Ballesteros to start a free trial and get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. I'm going to walk you through the settings using the Ricoh GR IIIx as an example, but it's exactly the same if you're on the GR III, as long as you're updated to the latest firmware that gives you access to the negative film simulation. So in the menu, we're going to be in the still image settings, and we're going to skip down to page 5. Page 5 is for the image capture settings. So for the file format, I set it to RAW plus JPEG. And while I'm mainly using the JPEGs for everything, even if I needed to do any minor edits in Lightroom, I save the RAWs just because you never know if you will need them, and it's always good to have the RAWs for archival purposes. I set the aspect ratio to 3:2, and I have the JPEG recorded pixels to the largest at 6000 by 4000. So the color space is also set to sRGB and not Adobe RGB. And the main reason for this is I want to keep these files compatible across the board on multiple devices, especially if I'm going to be editing or sharing on my phone. And then the image control settings is where the film simulation recipe really comes together. So in here, you can see that I have a little color chart here just so that we can see how the different settings come into play. And while you can customize the film simulation just at the top where you have the main different film simulations that you select from, the one that I use is negative film, but I actually set it to here at the bottom, which is custom 1, which you can set 2 different custom film simulation recipes on your camera. So I set this to negative film simulation, and the reason for this is it has kind of a slight more orange tone to the reds, and I notice it actually adds a little bit of green tint, which I feel gives the filmic look that is reminiscent of color negative films like Lomography 400, and it has kind of the closest look, I think, to classic chrome. It doesn't really match the blues exactly, especially with the color Chrome Effects blue, but it gets pretty darn close. So the next setting that we're going to change is the saturation. It's a little bit too muted for my liking at 0, so I have this set to +2. As far as the hue goes, I set this to 0, but if you want to see what that does, if you go to the plus side, that's going to be more of the green, and if you go on the negative side, that's going to be more of the magenta shift. And then for the high key and low key adjustment, I set this to 0, but if you want it to be a little bit more brighter or a little less harsh in the shadows, you can always add a little bit of high key adjustment. Or if you want it to bring in a darker look, you can go into negative and the low key. I set it to a pretty high contrast level at +3. That's mainly because when I shoot with the Ricoh, I tend to underexpose those really high contrast scenes. So I have this at +3 to keep the shadows really nice and deep. And then I have the contrast for the highlights set to -4 to try to get back some of that dynamic range in the highlight region. I set the shadows to -1 just to give a little bit of shadow recovery, but still keep it with a black tone within the shadows. And then for the sharpness, I have this set to +1. While I don't really like to add too much sharpness in camera, I feel like with the Ricoh, it just is the perfect balance to have it at +1 because the lens on this cameras are super sharp. And then for the shading, I actually don't know what this does, but I have it set to 0 and I have the clarity set to 0. That's because when I do want any type of softening to my image, I use a NIST adapter to add a Cinebloom filter to my Ricoh GR III and my GR IIIx. I mainly use the 10% diffusion filter for most daytime settings, and I actually been experimenting with using the 20% diffusion filter even in bright sunlight, and it gives a really kind of dreamy look to the images. So the reason why I use the custom settings is because I like to have custom 1 be color and have custom 2 be black and white. Comment down below if you want to see my black and white film simulation recipe for the Ricoh GR III and the GR IIIx. So there are a few things more that we actually have to adjust in camera, and that is going to be the dynamic range correction. I set this to highlight correction to auto. And then I have the shadow correction to medium. And I find this is a good balance between retaining some dynamic range, but at the same time keeping the high contrast for the type of photos that I shoot with the Ricohs. And for noise reduction, I actually leave this to 0 across the board for slow shutter speed noise reduction as well as high ISO noise reduction. And you can even have different custom ISO values for noise reduction, and I just set it to 0 across the board. And to finish off this film simulation recipe, we do have to go back up to the white balance setting. And I set this to auto white balance. In my Reggie's Portra film simulation recipe, auto white balance is very key because I like to keep it very versatile and not just set to daytime. And in order to offset it and make it a little bit warmer, I set it so that I have a white balance shift of A6, which brings it a little bit to the warmer tones. And I actually have the film simulation choices set to when I press the back command dial right here, and it lets you have 5 different settings that you can set here. And I actually set it to the middle one so that I can quickly change between Reggie's color negative and my black and white film simulation recipe very quickly. And with that, my name is Reggie Ballesteros. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you loved it, subscribe for more. And if you really want to see if this film simulation recipe comes close to Fujifilm, I really recommend you check out this video here and challenge your photographer's eye. Oh my god, I can't believe I had to record that twice.